you're struggling with inflammation in your body, you feel frustrated, you know that your cortisol levels are elevated, and you are chronically stressed. You feel pulled in multiple directions, overstimulated, overwhelmed. You feel like you're putting out fire after fire around you, and you don't know what to do. You know it's somehow all connected, but it feels really messy. And you know the things that you should be doing, but you're like, how the heck do I friggin' do them? I don't feel like I have time to do them. And it just all feels really, really overwhelming. If you can relate to that, you're definitely going to want to keep listening. This is the Peaceful Plate podcast. And today I'm going to talk about stress, cortisol, and inflammation. So if that relates for you, definitely keep listening. It's important that we take a step back and realize that stress, cortisol, and inflammation, they're not bad things. And we don't want to demonize them because that actually creates more fuel and more distress in our body. If we tense up every time we think or hear those words, it's almost like we're putting more fuel on the fire to feel more stressed about them. So we want to take a step back and realize, hey, like all three of those things play a valuable role, and there's a reason that they exist. So stress is important, right? Stress shifts our body into a sympathetic state, sometimes a state of fight or flight, where we're alert and we're ready to go. And that's really important. The issue arises when we're chronically stressed and we feel like we're constantly stuck in fight or flight. And a big reason why that's an issue, because when we're chronically stressed, we're chronically in that state of fight or flight, our cortisol levels are going to be elevated. They're going to be chronically elevated. And so cortisol is actually a stress hormone released by the adrenal glands in response to stress. So we get stressed out and we have that cortisol boost, right? Little cortisol goes out. And that's all really important, right? Cortisol is actually an anti-inflammatory, right? When it's at the ebb and flow, the levels that are healthy. But when we are chronically stressed, guess what happens? The cortisol continues to be released. And so that cortisol is building up in the body and it's at that elevated state. So we have the elevated stress, we have the elevated cortisol, and then our body, it doesn't respond to the cortisol in the same way, the way it's intended to. It no longer sees cortisol as an anti-inflammatory. And so it just continues to build up and build up. And so then what happens? Inflammation continues to build up and build up in our body. And we can feel caught in this cycle in which we're stressed. Our cortisol is elevated and the inflammation is just stacking up and stacking up. And it can feel really super frustrating. But what's really important to know is that you can decrease your stress levels. You can decrease the cortisol in your body. You can decrease the inflammation. And contrary to what many people out there are going to teach you, it doesn't have to be through a super restrictive diet. It doesn't have to be through a super restrictive diet. All right. Yeah, we want to be mindful of food. And it is very true that some foods are like medicine for our body, right? And then some foods are probably not going to support our ability to decrease the inflammation. But that doesn't mean we have to demonize those foods and get all like weird about them, right? And fearful of them. Actually, the fear is going to create more stress than any food will ever create. And so it's important that we take a step back. We understand that stress, cortisol, inflammation, they're valuable. They play really important roles. We want to make peace with those things. And so when we hear them, we don't tense up and tighten up and have that stress in our body. But we also want to get to the root of what's going on, which is actually the stress. And that's the hard part because we actually have to address the way that we're living life. We have to make some really big changes. Because if we are constantly packing our day so full that we can barely breathe, so full that there's no room for play, there's no room for joy, there's no room for rest, there's no room for fun, that's going to be an issue. And that's going to keep us in that chronically stressed out state. Cortisol levels are going to stay chronically elevated. Inflammation is going to continue to stack and stack and stack. So we get to the root, we address the stress. We set boundaries in our life. We say no to things that that we know will push us over that line or that we just don't want to do. We set boundaries with people that we know when we get together with them, it's just toxic for us. We make time for the things that light us up and refresh us. We stop feeling guilty for sleeping and resting. We bring play in. All these things are really important. And we do our breathing practices. So if you didn't see last week right here on the Peaceful Plate podcast, also on YouTube. So I share on the Peaceful Plate on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. For those that like audio, that's just like a really nice way for them to learn. It feels really good to you. You're like, I like to listen to it on the go, Eileen. But I also share on my YouTube because I also very much understand some people do best with visual. It's like the body language, the facial expression that helps them take in the information. That's kind of like how I roll. That's really helpful for me. I want to see somebody when I'm talking to them or when they're talking. And so I do offer both options, and that's why. So yeah, anyways, last week I did share a practice. I shared a practice on deep belly breathing to help activate your parasympathetic nervous system. So if you haven't done that, I highly suggest you go back, you do that practice. It's little practices like that that are going to create very big shifts. If you do that little practice daily, boom, your nervous system is going to be like, thank you, you just gave me the sweetest hug ever. And so doing practices that help shift your nervous system into that parasympathetic state, that ventral vagal state, really, really important. And that like gets to the root of what's going on. If you're struggling with inflammation and you've been really working on what you're eating and you've cut out a lot of foods and like you're not seeing any difference, I highly suggest you take a different approach and you go through healing your nervous system. I actually don't really believe in restrictive diets. I think they cause so much more harm than good. Unless you have a medical reason, there's a medical reason going on, maybe you have celiac, something's going on like that, and you really need to cut something out for that reason. I 100% agree with that and understand that. But there's so much focus on just food restriction, food restriction, food restriction, as if it's going to like be the thing that fixes everything. But no, we need to address the state of our nervous system. We need to get to a place in which we're not chronically stressed out if we really want to address the inflammation in our body. And so, yeah, I hope that rant was helpful for you. I hope that rant was helpful for you. And the practice I put up last week is really going to help you. And I'll be continuing to share more, continuing to share more practices here as well. Little mini ones. I'm not going to give you, well, maybe I will. I should never say that I won't, but my intention is not to give you a big long hour practice because I feel like it's just not digestible. I know you're busy. I know you got things to do. And so giving you little small bits, my hope is that you'll actually do them. You'll get a little taste and you'll be like, yeah, that actually was helpful. Damn, I'm going to make a little more time to do another practice later. That's how I work, at least. I want a little bit. I want to feel the impact in my body and my nervous system. I want to feel the little shift, the little change, and then I'm probably going to come back and do another practice. So I hope this is helpful for you. What I really want you to take away from this short little lesson is that stress, it's not a bad thing. It's actually really important. It's important to have some stress in our lives, right? We just don't want to be chronically stressed out. Cortisol, really important. It's actually an anti-inflammatory. When it's at the levels that it's meant to be at, it ebbs and flow. It has that natural ebb and flow, and it's not chronically elevated. It only becomes an issue when it's chronically elevated, when the body doesn't no longer responds to it the way it's designed to. Your body's no longer seeing it as that anti-inflammatory. That's when it becomes an issue. And then inflammation is not even an issue, right? Unless it's chronically elevated. Inflammation does play an important role when it's at the levels it's designed to be at, when it's doing the job in the way it's supposed to do it. When the inflammation stacks up because our stress and our cortisol is elevated, that's when the issues arise. And that's when the inflammation actually becomes a stressor in our body. And things start to show up like foggy headed, digestive issues, and a whole array of other things, right, that come along with inflammation. But inflammation, stress, cortisol, at their original point, for lack of better words, they're not bad. And I think really reframing our relationship with them, it's important. Because again, if we constantly stress up whenever we hear the words or think of the words, that just brings on more stress. But if we can release and be like, hey, like these play important roles. I just want to find the natural ebb and flow in my body and the balance in my body with these things so they can do their job the way that they're designed to do. So levels are not chronically elevated. So I hope, I hope this was helpful for you. Thank you for listening to me share my thoughts as I'm thinking through them, because that's what I do. And I know for me, when I really started to make peace and I started to understand the role of stress, understand the role of cortisol, understand even the role of inflammation, it really helped me to not tense up and to be able to be like, you know what? I'm going to do some practices to shift things for myself. I'm going to do some breath work. I'm going to set boundaries in my life. I'm going to say no when it's not the most life-giving thing for me to say yes. And so I hope this is helpful for you. Stay tuned. If you find this helpful and you find it enjoyable and you want more practices, you're like, yeah, I want to know a little more about that, Eileen, then stay tuned because I'll be sharing more mini practices here. I also have a membership. It's called Nourished Beyond the Plate. Doors will be opening this spring. I will put the link in the show notes where you can just go and you can read about like, what is it about? What the heck is Nourished? And I'm also putting something very special together for you, which I'll be sharing soon. Some practices to stimulate your vagus nerve that you can just do at your house at your own pace. And so stay tuned for that. And as always, just thank you for being here. Yeah, I really love showing up here, chit-chatting and talking. And so thank you for holding space for me to do that. And I hope you have an amazing day.